Chapter 2. On each side of the path. From the cottage in which we lived to the house of our governess, a path, which we thought very long, opened to a beautiful meadow. But before the meadow, on each side of the path, was the tallest and thickest hedge of thorns one ever did see. Little Belle and I, as we walked to school, often looked at this hedge and considered what could be beyond it. On that side, which was towards the east, we saw many trees and heard birds singing in them. These trees were covered with leaves, for it was autumn when we first began to go to school, and among the leaves we could distinguish apples, some of a bright gold color and some of a beautiful red. Beyond these trees, where the branches opened, we saw blue hills, the tops of which rose high towards the clouds. On the other side we could see nothing over the edge but the sky itself, and in the evenings the sun setting, sometimes in a clear bright sky and sometimes among the glorious clouds of gold and purple color. It resembled what I had pictured to myself of the gates of heaven, for my father, as I have just mentioned, every night used to take my sister and me on his lap and talk to us about heaven. Though he was a man of low condition, yet from constantly reading the Bible and thinking on holy things, being no doubt taught of God the Spirit, he had such sweet sayings as made my heart burn within me when I heard him speak. And thus we had such ideas put into our young minds as few poor men's children are acquainted with. Thus the Holy Spirit of God entered into the hearts of the poor among men, as the rain comes on the earth where no man is, on the wilderness wherein there is no man. It fills and satisfies their untaught minds with heavenly thoughts, and enables them to bring forth the fruits of holy words and works, as the rain satisfies the desolate in the waste ground, and causes the bud of the tender herb to spring forth. But to return to my story, from day to day, little Belle and I, as we went to and from school, talked about the hedge and expressed our anxiety to know more of what was beyond it. And I, being the eldest, made myself very busy in pointing out to my sister what I supposed would be the advantages which would follow if we could but get through the hedge. Perhaps, I said, if it was not for this naughty hedge on the one side, we might get to the top of the hills, and then we should be as high as the clouds, or we might find apples falling from those trees, or a vineyard in which we could bless mother and father with baskets of fruit. Or if we could break through the hedge on the other side, we might perhaps see the end of the world, and the places where the sun goes at night. I remember talking this way to my little sister for many days, as we were creeping backwards and forwards to school, and I remember also how she used to wonder at what I said, and no doubt she thought me very clever. Our schoolmistress was a good woman, one who really feared God, who knew and deeply felt the state of mankind on earth and the depravity of our nature. She knew the corruption of children and set her whole heart, with God's help, to do what she could to overcome it. But her pupils, not having the same views as their faithful teacher, of course thought her too strict. They could not feel the necessity of the restraint under which they were frequently laid, and they naturally revolted at it. It is the Holy Spirit only that can prepare the heart to submit to the beneficial discipline. As Mrs. Waring's house and garden stood in an open place, and as I could trace the much-hated hedge beyond it, I formed a plan with Belle to go after school in the evening and see if we could find any opening by which we might get round to the apple trees. But our good governess was too watchful to allow our plan to succeed. As she sat at her window, she observed which way I went, and calling me back, she asked me where I was going, and why I did not, as usual, return home immediately. And as I could not give any good account of myself, she chastised me and sent us off again and watched us closely till we had proceeded a good way along the safe and narrow path which I so much disliked. When by the winding of the way we were out of our governess's sight, I sat down on the bank near the hedge and began to cry very bitterly. My little Belle took her blue handkerchief and wiped my eyes and kissed my cheek and put her arms round my neck, begging me not to cry. And in this manner she comforted me for a while, and we returned home. But when I lay down in my bed that night, I was not happy. My wicked will rose up against the hedge of thorns. I could not think of heaven or any good thing. I had no pleasure in saying my prayers, and I cried myself to sleep. The next morning I awoke in the same disposition, and resolved that I would that very day endeavor to break through the hedge. At the usual time I set off to school with my little Belle. When we came opposite the apple trees, we looked upon the fruit, and I thought it exceedingly beautiful. "Oh, Belle," I said, "if we could but get through this hedge, we could easily reach some of that fruit." "Or perhaps," she said, "we might find some apples under the tree, but we cannot get out of this path, brother, because of the hedge." "Here," I answered, "here is the gap in the hedge." Earlier that week, I had snipped the branches of the hedge and made a small breach. The hedge stood taller than Goliath of Gath, and wider than the 2 giant oaks, and the thorns were as long as the stem of a maple leaf. If I could but make the breach a little larger, I thought, we could creep through. "You go first, little Belle, because you are the smallest, and I would follow." My little sister thought it not a good plan, but was overruled by me. And we settled that as it was Saturday, and we were to have half a holiday, we would complete our naughty plan on our way home. So we went to school, and at 12 o'clock we were set free. Having completed my chores early that morning, Mama and Papa would not need my help until milking time. It was now time for my naughty plan to help me find what was on the other side of the hedge. End of chapter 2. Hit a thumbs up and then follow the link below to chapter 3.